What's up, Gator Nation? Welcome to the latest Gators Online show. Zach Abaverdi and Nick Del Toro here. We will be joined on today's episode by JD Piccol of On3 to get his thoughts on the Florida Gators following SEC Media Days in Dallas. JD was on the scene. Nick was on the scene. We came to you guys a couple days ago with our rapid reaction. We'll do an extended episode today with kind of some more takeaways that we had from Dallas and some things that we learned about this Florida football team. Nick, glad to be back in the Sunshine State.
Yeah, happy that I did not book a flight for Friday, that I booked a flight early Thursday or early enough Thursday. By the time I landed back in Jacksonville from Dallas, planes were grounded. No one's flying today. No one was flying yesterday, last night. Some issue with Microsoft. Weird of the Mac to announce their partnership with Microsoft for the tablets. Not a good day for Bill Gates' company. But yeah, it was interesting being in Dallas. I hadn't really ever spent much time in Dallas. I think we were out there in 2017 for the opener against Michigan. Was there.
Why you got to bring it up again?
Was there for the Cotton Bowl with Dan Mullen. So I think there was only
just two bad experiences.
Those are 2 times I was there. 2 times I was there, seeing Jerry's World. Got to spend a little bit more time. Cool place, but like Southern hospitality went a little too far. It's a long trek, an expensive trek for us to get out there. Should have made the boys from Texas and Oklahoma come to Birmingham or Atlanta. Can we do it in Tampa? Orlando would be a hot spot. Plenty of convention center space.
That's right.
Can send the guys to Disney World. Nashville, always a fan of Nashville. I would say that you got the better of these two, Zach. We only did 1-1 for the last 2 media days. I obviously wasn't going to go right after my honeymoon. I think I landed back in America on a Monday and then would have had to leave on Wednesday for media days. And I was like, just Zach, you go. So I went this year, but I would have traded Nashville for Dallas for sure.
Yeah, I'm happy with how that exchange went. But nonetheless, got to see the boys with the cowboy hats on. That was a cool picture that they took. And
so that was something that they did for all the guys. Every team that came in, they got cowboy hats and they were able to customize them however they want. Being in the back room of Florida, Billy Napier's cowboy hat has a little feather in it. And the players were shocked to find out that Billy Napier would be a feather in his cowboy hat kind of guy.
Yeah, well, I think that Florida fans would like to see a few feathers go in that cap this fall. And at least one media member out there on the national scene, or should we say the league-wide scene, seemed pretty bullish on Florida in Dallas, and that was Greg McElroy. I don't know if you guys saw that story on Gators Online right before Florida took the stage and Napier took the stage. He and Roman Harper kind of had a back and forth about Florida and just their thoughts about this team. And Roman Harper, Nick, was like, "Hey, they got to win 4 out of the first 5, like mandatory." And we've talked about that. I know fans have looked at the schedule and probably thought that. And then he said, "Hey, man, they might have a chance in some of these games on the back half of their schedule, but he's not as sure about the roster and if the Gators can compete with those teams." And then Greg McElroy chimed in, McElwain's boy, and I got some history a little bit there with Billy too. So I think that there's a respect level there with this program, and I think what Billy's trying to build. And McElroy thinks that Florida is not far off. In fact, he said that they're being the most disrespected team in the entire league coming into 2024. Says Vegas has them at 4.5 wins. And then Roman put him on the spot and was like, "Well, how many games do you got them winning?" And McElroy said that he thinks that they have a chance of being closer to 7 wins than they do being closer to 4.5. And even went as far to say that he thinks that that he won't be surprised if Florida knocks off a team with legitimate playoff expectations, and also went into their roster and rather their recruiting and how the last 5 years they've been in the top 10 to 12. And with the transfer portal, he's like, if you look at Florida's blue chip ratio as a roster, it's still up there, with among the top 10 teams in the nation. So
shout out to Bud Elliott with the blue chip.
Yeah, so interesting to see that back and forth with Greg and Roman, because Roman clearly was not a believer in the Gators, whereas Greg thinks that people are counting them out.
Yeah, we a couple of the writers who were out playing some pool, having some drinks, and ran into Greg and talked to him for a little bit, and even off camera, he shared the same thoughts. It'll be interesting to see. We don't really know, especially when you look at that back half. Like everything looks difficult, but like, what will Florida State look like in November?
What LSU look like?
Yeah, Nick Saban, the president of the state of Alabama, said like Ole Miss straight up did not have the line of scrimmage to compete with us, like the higher ups of the SEC. He goes, they do this year. But what does Ole Miss look like at home? Florida gets them at home. What does Kentucky look like? And you get Kentucky at home. But yeah, I think I do agree. Florida needs to stack wins early. And it's interesting getting home last night and being able to staying up a little too late, playing NCAA, like going through some rosters and stuff like that. And you're like, maybe you learned your lesson last year against Kentucky. Like, hey, we're not going to line up and dominate Kentucky on both lines of scrimmage. And maybe we need to get the ball in space and utilize our skill positions and our speed. And maybe you get that win in that Kentucky monkey off your back. But yeah, it's talking to people there. There's a wide range of opinions.
There is
on the Florida Gators.
There is, yeah, and it's
because I'm out there getting asked a lot, like, "Hey, what week does Billy Napier get fired?" And I'm like, "I don't know that he does." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And then you've got guys who, like Greg McElroy, they're like, they're closer to a 7-5 win team. My EA Sports simulation had the Gators ranked number 12 heading into the Florida State week. Heading into Florida State week, they were a playoff team heading into Florida State week. And Zach, let me tell you this: if Florida goes 8-4 this year, I will go full FSU beat from last year. That there's the fix is in. An 8-4 Florida team is playoff bound. Zach, I will go full homer. Send Florida to the playoff if they go 8-4 this year.
Yeah. I think a lot of Florida fans would take the simulation that you got, which was including a win over Georgia. And
so like my simulation is what I've also told people is like, there's no number for wins and losses. There's no like ultimatum. You have to get to this number, Billy, or else your job is you're getting fired. Because like 8-4. That's probably the worst feeling 8-4 you could have. Like you lose to Miami. I think you
lose to Florida State.
Lose to Florida State. You didn't look very good against Samford. That was like a 24-3 game. You went into double overtime against Kentucky. But like losing to Florida State to get knocked out of the playoff, I think leaves a really bad taste in your mouth for what 8-4 right now. I think anyone right now on July 19th, shout out to my sister. Happy 27th birthday, Danielle, today. But anyone would take that schedule right now or take that record right now. But like losing to Florida State to miss the playoff would be brutal. You end up in the Cheez-It Bowl instead of the playoff.
Yeah, that would be that'd be quite the interesting finish. But yeah, if you told any Florida fan right now, you'll be 8-4, you'll reach number 12, you'll be in the playoff conversation. You're going to end the year with a loss to Florida State, but you beat Georgia.
Brutal.
But you beat Georgia.
Beat Georgia. Beat Georgia by a couple scores. It wasn't even a one-possession game.
Yeah, that was a roller coaster ride of a simulation. I don't know what EA
Which makes sense. Which makes sense because like there's nothing has been like easy or by the book in the 11 years I've been covering, 12 years you've been covering Florida. There's always something that's happening, and certainly starting off 0-1, then ripping off 4 wins, losing at Tennessee, double overtime next week, then beating Georgia. That was a wild ride. But yeah, there's a lot of varying opinions on the Gators, and I think that's why we want to get our guy JD Piccol on here soon and see what his perspective is, because talking with other beat writers, whether it's Mississippi State writers that were out there, Tennessee, Kentucky, a lot of the beat writers just I think don't think Florida will be very good, while a lot of the national guys are kind of buying more into Florida can surprise some people. And I don't think surprise some people means 9-3. I think surprise some people is coming off of, hey, the over-under's 4.5. Like that's too low.
No doubt. Well, you mentioned JD. We got him waiting in the wings to come on and give his thoughts on Florida after getting an up-close and personal look at the Gators in Dallas. Before we do that, want to give a shout-out to My Perfect Franchise, as we do each and every week. If you're ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream, looking for a side hustle while working your current job, wanting to diversify, build wealth, and or leave a legacy, Andy can help. He's a franchise consultant as well as a franchise owner, and helps people find franchises that fit their skill sets, financial requirements, time to commit, and more. His services are 100% free, and he's here to help if you have any questions about business ownership. You can learn more and contact Andy anytime at myperfectfranchise.net, or calling or texting him at 404-973-9901. And with that, we're going to bring in On Three's JD Piccol. JD, welcome into the show, my friend. How's it going?
Fellas, I'm great. Appreciate you having me on. There's a certain buzz in the air now that we're post media days. It feels like it's actually about to happen now. There's going to be football play in the next few weeks. I can't wait.
Yeah, every time
to me, media days. Yeah, to me, media days is like the unofficial start of the season. Like Florida starts OTAs Monday. No pads or anything, but we're doing football stuff now. Less talking and more actual football stuff.
What I've always said is Thanksgiving is to Christmas what media days is to college football season. Like, it's just a little something to hold you over, but when it arrives, you know that Christmas college football season around the corner.
It's the sweet potato pie. It's a mashed potato. It's the turkey with gravy, but you understand that Santa is coming with more gifts soon.
Yes, exactly.
JD, before we get your thoughts on Florida, I just want to get your overall takeaways and feelings from SEC Media Days. Just the whole week, getting to see all the teams, getting to see the two new teams in the league, and what you just think about this conference going in 2024 and all the new dynamics.
I mean, it was already a massive deal to have media days, I mean, as y'all can both attest to having attended it, like it already feels big, but something about being in the Lone Star State, something about seeing the Texas logo and the OU logo and kind of having that buzz about the new kids in the school just felt like an even bigger production than maybe last year in Nashville. And that's not knocking what happened in last year in Nashville. It's just kind of the new chapter that is the new era of college football, with not just the SEC being bigger, but the Big Ten being bigger, the ACC looking different, Pac-12 downsizing to 2 teams. So it felt like the official kick to what college football is going to be in the future, which was really exciting. But I mean, shout out to Nick De La Torre, just alley-ooping us an interview with Graham Mertz, which we appreciate tremendously. And getting to talk to him was a lot of fun. He's just like, you can tell he's a grown-up, he's adult, he's a comfortable in his own skin kind of guy. And I really enjoyed talking to him, but it felt very, very real to have Oklahoma and Texas there.
Were there enough Texas questions throughout the week?
I think the under hit, because the under, or the over was what was it? Was it 476.5? Something like that. Yeah. So I think we're maybe a little short of quota, but yeah, I wish they had talked more about Texas and OU, man. I wish they had. I wish Sark could talk more about Arch Manning. He does this whole soliloquy to start off his podium time, and then the first question is, "What about Arch Manning?" I'm just like, it's media days, baby. Let's roll.
We're here. It's official. Well, you mentioned the Gators. A lot of things and directions that we could go, JD, but just to start, you've talked so much about this Florida football team. You've had a lot of different clips and stuff that have made the rounds on social media, I think, and a lot of it has gotten Florida fans fired up. But this was your chance to kind of see from these guys up close and personal was there anything you really wanted to hear or see from Billy and these guys to kind of maybe confirm some of the things that you felt about this team?
You know, it's funny because everybody ran with the Billy Napier quote of on schedule to some degree. And then you look at the wins and losses and you're like 5-7, what schedule are you on? What are we doing here? And I think the further we got away from that quote, and as we got some more time to digest it, it was like media days isn't built for a coach coming off a 5-7 season who opens with Miami. Like it's not.
Yeah.
Like what Florida needs is week 1 to arrive and to be able to actually put the ball down and play 11-on-11 against Miami. That's what they need. So media days, I think if you're Florida and you have some self-awareness, they probably knew what they were walking into. I appreciated what Graham Mertz said, though, in our time with him. He was like, you are what you do on the football field. Like last year, we were a 5-7 outfit. There's no disputing that. We can feel a certain way in-house about what we could have accomplished, but like that's who we are. We're a 5-7 team. However, that was last year. This team doesn't have to be 5-7. We can go, kind of make our own mark on what we want to be in the history of Florida football. So to answer your question, I don't know there was really anything I was expecting to see. You always want to see your coach and your players present confidence and say all the right things and not make headlines. But again, if you're Florida, this wasn't built for you to win media days, so to speak.
Well, and I just want to follow up on that.
Ahead,
I want to follow up real quick on that on schedule thing, because that to me was the comment of the day that came out of Billy's appearance. And actually in one of the other rooms, he seemingly clarified that comment and talked a little bit more of what he meant about the program being on schedule, not necessarily the wins and the losses. Mm-hmm. And he didn't say this, but I almost kind of felt like in laying out his program and what he expected going in, it was almost like part of that process of being on schedule was going to include some tough seasons early on. Like they almost expected that. But I think from a roster building standpoint, from a culture standpoint, from where they just have the program, I think that's what he was more referring to in terms of the things that are on schedule. But like you said, JD, people just look at wins and losses at the end of the day, and that's what they think.
No, I 100% agree. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
He's on a schedule. He didn't specify whose schedule, Zach. It's an undisclosed schedule, and they're right on it.
Everyone's got their own schedule. Everybody has their own agenda they're working off of. But no, I think what you said is on the money. Like we echoed that same sentiment when we got to talk about it on our show. Was like we all, to quote Dan Lanning, you only get a window into what's going on in the house, and so all we get to see is the actual product on the field. Whereas on schedule, with how we lift, with how we practice, with like you mentioned, the culture, like those things may still be on schedule. I also think when you look at the wins and losses, it's easy to look back on the season and kind of piece it together in a favorable way for your own team. But I do think when you talk about progress, like for me, I went into last year saying if Florida can get to 7 wins, then you can pitch trajectory and progress, because you go to 6-7 to 7-6, like that'd be great. Look at the games they probably felt like they should have won. I think you could make a case for the Arkansas game. I think you make a case for the Missouri game. I think even the Florida State game, a lot of folks in Gainesville, I would have to believe, felt like they let slip away. So the South Carolina game, there's no way around that. You stole that one, and that's what good teams do. They find a way to steal games, or I guess teams that have good players find a way to steal games. But if you're looking at wins and losses, I don't think that it's irresponsible to talk about those games as well and say, well, if you're talking about schedule and progress, like that also could have been something you look at and point to and say that's on schedule.
Great point. Great point.
And also, I kind of brought this up, I think, when we did a rapid reaction, Zach, like Florida gets compared to FSU. Obviously, it's a rival, but Mike Norvell instantly flipped that program through the transfer portal. And when Mike Norvell was hired, he had his own trials and tribulations because it was 2020. And Florida fans were like, why isn't Billy doing that and flipping the roster through the transfer portal? Their process and their point of emphasis is we're building our roster through high school recruiting, and we'll supplement through the transfer portal. You've also had, and Billy brought this up, every 6 months, the goalpost is changing, and NIL is different. The transfer portal is different. NIL became a thing in Florida July, so 5 months after Billy Napier took the job. Now NIL is a thing, and that has completely transformed from the scientist into the Hulk. So trying to manage that landscape is a lot more difficult for a coach who is taking over a program, trying to change the culture, not just the climate, than say like a Kirby Smart or a Nick Saban or somebody who's been in that position in their job for years at that point.
I'm going to say something a little bit too broad and probably a little bit too incendiary. It's not really helpful, but like, what does Florida do if they're put into the ACC? Like the comp for me is always like, if you are trying to plug holes in a boat that's taken on water, which to me is what Florida was when Billy Napier got there. Probably the same thing for Mike Norvell at Florida State. When you're pushing that boat out to sea, it's a lot easier to paddle in the calm waters, or the more calm waters rather, of the ACC, as opposed to the monsoon of the SEC. Like, you're going to, if you don't plug those holes perfectly, they're going to get torn up pretty quickly. And so that's not taking anything away from Florida State. When you comp the two situations, I get where people are coming from, but I also think like roster talent and roster level and how it fares in different conferences probably should be paid attention to as well.
No doubt. No doubt. You got to visit with Graham, as you mentioned, JD, and, you know, you hear some of the experts around the league, analysts, former quarterbacks. We were talking about Greg McElroy. I know Jordan Rodgers also was on, and both of those guys are very high on Graham. What are your expectations for him this year? I think he exceeded what everybody thought of him in 2023. What type of a jump do you feel like he can make in 24?
I think the boring answer is probably like the next step. I think the more specific answer I would give is probably somewhere in the range of, if he could be around like 27 touchdowns, 4 or 5 picks, I feel like that would probably excite a lot of Florida fans. I think the big thing for Florida fans is, all right, Billy Napier hit here. Like, Billy Napier, one, got a guy who can play good football. 2, did a great job putting him in position to be successful without a ton of extra help at the pass catcher positions. Like, now you got Trey Wilson going into year 2, Shamir DK, which I know is getting a lot of buzz right now out there in Gainesville. Elijah Badger through the portal. And so Graham Mertz getting another year in the system, getting more weapons. Like, I'm really excited to see what he is here in this upcoming season, because I think, going back to what I said about Napier being able to hit here in the portal with Mertz, like, remember how much pushback that move got early on? It was like, hey, are you sure? Like, that guy from Wisconsin who turns the ball over every other play, are we sure that's the guy? And I think Napier probably has at least that feather in his cap to say, I know what I'm doing to some degree here at the quarterback position, and I expect it to continue to trend upward.
The feather that he had in Dallas, right, Nick? That was the Graham Mertz feather.
Yeah. The reaction was, not only does this guy turn the ball over, but he's coming from a program that doesn't know that the forward pass is now legal in the game of football. Act as if they were allergic to passing the ball, and that's who you're replacing Anthony Richardson with. Graham Mertz took a page out of Felipe Frank's book, Zach, and just told us all to be quiet after his performance last year. I think there's probably not, for what Graham Mertz did last year, I feel like he's not being talked about enough. And I wrote a story power ranking the quarterbacks Florida will face this year, and only 8 of them are SEC teams. But as I started looking through, to me, Graham Mertz is a top 4 or 5 quarterback in the league. And you're looking at a guy like Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart, former number 1 player in the universe, DJ. Oh, DJ's not in there, but DJ's on their schedule. But I look around, and obviously Nico at Tennessee, and I'm like, I think Graham Mertz is – I would have a hard time putting 5 guys ahead of Graham Mertz in the league.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree, especially if you're going off of just like the body of work so far. Like, I've been on record and said I think Nico's going to be really freaking good. Like, I think he's going to thrive in that system, but that's still a big question mark. I mean, first year starting in the SEC, we'll see. I think Jalen Milroe is going to be phenomenal as well, but right now, I think you look at what Graham Mertz did a season ago, and I feel pretty good about him going into another year in the same system. So I think there's definitely a case to be made for him to be a top 5 guy in the conference, no doubt.
And I think going into the year, JD, go ahead, Nick.
No, go ahead. I was going to switch topics.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think going into the year, there's not even, for the most part, I think people know what to expect from Florida's offense. You know what you're going to get with Graham Mertz. Like, you got to replace Ricky Pearsall. There's going to be question marks about that offensive line and people observing whether or not they've gotten better there. But it's really the defensive side of the ball where they've got to get better and where they've struggled the last few years. What are some of the biggest question marks that you have, JD, with Florida's defense? And some of the things that you're going to be watching for early on to see if there's progress there?
I think something that we've all three talked about at different points, whether I've been texting y'all or banging your line at some point during the week, is like, hey, how much better are they from last year personnel-wise? And I know the secondary is a big talking point there with all the experience they now have on the back end compared to playing a lot of young bucks last year. And I mean, let's face it, that was a unit last year that really at times took on quite a bit of water for Florida. And there were guys, kind of just being thrown into the fire and having to figure it out on the fly. And so being able to just be much more established in that regard, I'm excited about. Asa Turner coming over from Washington has played now 45 years of college football and has a sweet flow to show for it. So that'll be great. But also the depth part of this, like how far along are they in the second platoon and the guys that have to play at different points during the year? If guys do get dinged up, as tends to happen in the violent sport of college football, like that's something I'm really curious to see and something that's been a talking point really since Billy Napier got there. How stocked is the cupboard to take a line from Nick De La Torre?
And to me, the biggest thing was Billy Napier, 3 or 4 years coaching at UL, 2 at Florida, 6 years as a head coach, and never fired an assistant coach. Within 48 hours of the last season ending, 2 assistant coaches on the defensive side of the ball were let go. Another one left. You have 13 new players, either via transfer portal or high school. Many of those, probably 7 of the 13, expected to start or play right away. So the defensive overhaul has been drastic. So but that is the thing. Like Florida's offense was not the issue. For all of the flack that Billy Napier as play calling gets, it's conservative, it's too slow. What are we doing running on the ball on 2nd and 12? For all the flack that he gets, the defense is what cost Florida that 5-game losing streak to end the year.
No doubt. JD, final thing for you as we get ready to kind of turn the page and get ready for fall training camp. I know we're still some time away from the football season. We're not going to blast this out on the socials once you say this to us, but we are going to put you on the spot here. Hopefully, Cold Takes Exposed isn't watching this episode because he's a Florida fan, so he might bring this back up. But do you have any bold predictions right now for the Florida Gators? Is there anything right now that you feel here on July 19th that you can say about this team that's kind of would be a bold statement going into the year?
I think I've said this a few different times on our show, maybe other shows. So I guess if I'm wrong, I'm going to be wrong in a very public way. So I mean, let's dance. I think Florida makes a bowl game, and I think they beat somebody in November. And I know with that November schedule, that's asking a lot, and that's brutal. But like, I just think about how things look right now in July and how they could look in October could be very, very different. Like last year, we're at SEC Media Days talking about, is Eli Drinkwitz going to keep his job at Missouri? We fast forward the tape, and they won 10 ball games and beat Ohio State. So I say all that to say the schedule they have right now looks absolutely brutal. But what does LSU look like in November? What does Texas look like after going through the gauntlet that is the SEC? So I'm not calling my shot for them to beat necessarily those specific teams, but somebody in November, I think they're going to catch slipping, and I think they'll win a bowl game, or at least get to a bowl game and hopefully win a bowl game.
And if you were a betting man, you are on the over or under at 4.5 wins?
I am probably taking out a sizable loan and then probably finding someone in, maybe in the gray area of the legal world and finding a way to take out more money then and then put it all in the over for Florida 4.5.
All right.
Yeah.
You heard it here.
4.5. I do have a line that I'll give you. Feel free to use this one too, JD. The men and women who build palaces in the desert don't keep building them for being wrong.
Let me say that again. I'm going to record that. Say that one more time slow so I got the notes app out. Let me say that one.
Well, I scoffed at the line last year, and then Florida was 1 game away from hitting the over and then lost its next 5. The men and women in Vegas typically know what they're doing, but I think 4.5 is low as well.
Love it.
No doubt. Well, we love that we got you on the show, JD. It was great to hear from you. Great to follow your coverage all week in Dallas. Great job as always, man. And thanks for getting us through this off season and this long summer. to get us closer to football season, man. I know I speak for all the college football fans out there when we say we appreciate your coverage.
Hey man, well I appreciate that. I'm standing on y'all's shoulders whenever I text and call y'all for any intel and your opinions on it. So I appreciate y'all letting me blow up your cellular devices all off season.
Awesome, man. Well, we got to blow you up today, man. Thanks for coming on, and we'll have you on once the season starts and we got actually football being played.
Let's do it. Can't wait.
Awesome. JD Piccol from On3. Great to hear from him as always, and always great stuff that he provides you guys when it comes to Gator content on his YouTube channel. So make sure that you guys are following that. And man, he's right though, Nick. Once you get to this week, it's like, what, we're about a week or two away from fall training camp, getting ready to start. I mean, we're here, man.
Yeah, we'll get OT. Well, what phase are we in now, Zach?
We're in phase. I think it's phase 5. It's the regimen phase. They're in the regimen phase.
And then,
although we don't know,
have
the names been changed? Has Tyler Miles changed it? He's changed the workouts. He's changed the philosophy.
Listen, I think the names come from the head coach. I think the names come from the top down.
That's true.
But Florida will start OTAs. So everything they've been doing now is either run by Tyler Miles in the strength conditioning, whether that's running, lifting, that program, and then they do player run practices. And listen, there is direction from the coaches. It's not just like a game of pickup basketball where the guys are going out and doing whatever they want. There is direction for the player run practices. But now, starting next week, Florida will start the OTA periods where the coaching staff is allowed a certain amount of time to be actually on the field and coaching. And it'll be fun. I think we will be looking forward to that, seeing some new guys that we haven't seen. I know I've been asked 800 times why Aaron Childs isn't on Florida's roster because it's the spring roster. If you pull up floridagators.com roster, it says 2024 spring roster.
Well, and then for anyone that's like, well, then how come Jason Sandamiller or Cormani McClain or Badgers? And that's because they were at other schools in the spring and opted in to be in the game.
No. I'm not talking about EA college football. I'm asking the Florida Gator roster page. People are wondering. People were thinking that Aaron Childs did not get into Florida or was not coming to Florida because he wasn't on the roster page. Like Cormani's not on Florida's roster page. Jason Zandamella is not on the roster page because it's the
Badger isn't either.
2024 spring roster page, which in bold letters says it right when you pull up the roster. But yes, you're right. In terms of the video game, the freshmen who were not on campus in the spring didn't have the time to opt in to give their name, image, and likeness, sign that over to EA to be included in the game. The roster is still working. Florida, I don't believe, has 85 players named in it right now. So there is more players to be added. I would expect Aaron Childs, Jason Daniel is in the game, but I would expect Aaron Childs to be in the game. Get your hands
Jackson.
on yep.
Amir Jackson as well. He'll be another one. So let's jump back into the SEC Media Days talk. Again, we gave you guys a rapid reaction. I encourage you to go watch that if you haven't. That was Nick joining us live from Dallas. Now we've had a couple days to kind of sit back, see how we feel about all the comments that were made. Was there anything that stuck out? Anything that we learned? Anything that was kind of a main takeaway? I mean, one right out of the gate that I noticed kind of reading back through the comments and watching some of the interviews, Nick, was Shamar James got asked to name some players that people don't know about, but they'll become household names in 2024. And he named 4 players. And interestingly enough, and didn't think about them, he just rattled these names off. Greg Smith, Jameer Grimsley, DJ Douglas, and Traquise Bridges. Those were the 4 that he named. He said those are some names that we have that I believe are going to make a big splash this year. Now, what's interesting about those 4 guys is every single one of them play in the secondary. So, and interesting also is that those wouldn't necessarily be the names that you would expect him to name. Like, there are names that we know in the secondary, and there are names that are going to start in the secondary. But the question that he got asked was who's some that people don't know that he thinks are going to emerge. I guess of the 4 that he named, Nick, the only one that I would have expected was DJ Douglas. And I think Bridges is going to play and be part of that rotation. But man, for him to single out Greg Smith and Jameer Grimsley, I mean, those 2 must have really impressed him as early enrollees in the spring. And look, as we know, the Gators need all the help that they can get in the secondary.
Mm-hmm.
I've written this stat several times, but 20 passing plays last season of 40-plus yards. That was second to last nationally. So they gave up too many big plays in the passing game. And, yeah, if they can get some of those guys to provide an impact, I think also you're going to obviously see Asa Turner. He's going to help a lot. But 4 guys that James named, all from the secondary, that he thinks is going to make an impact. And Douglas was a guy we heard a lot about this spring, Nick.
Yeah, and I don't know what impact they're going to make on defense. Just looking at the way the depth chart shakes out right now, but I think DJ Douglas, Jameer Grimsley, Greg Smith are all guys that will or should be playing special teams right away. But an interesting group because that's, to me, the future. Like, and maybe those guys are making their biggest impact when Shamar James is gone. Like, I think if Shamar James has a good season, he's a candidate to go to the NFL and to leave school early. And Jameer Grimsley might be making his biggest impact while Shamar James is in the NFL. I just think that Florida added those older players, Traquise, DJ, Asa, not to come and, retire as college football players in the state of Florida, but to come and play and impact right away. So,
no doubt.
Douglas, Bridges, Turner, I would expect all of them to play this year.
And I'm that's one of my most, I guess, intriguing things is whether they use one of those guys at the star with Sharif Denson and Aaron Gates, or do they just roll with those 2 guys as young guys? Or do you put one of your redshirt senior safeties that can play nickel there just to give you more depth and experience and give those guys maybe more playing time than they would rather get at safety, depending on how that depth chart shakes out. So those were 4 names that James put out there. And then Montrell Johnson, interestingly enough, also he named 2 freshmen that he thinks are kind of going to make a name for themselves this season and make an impact right away. Now, one is not going to surprise you, Nick. Who do you think he named as one of the freshmen? Just happens to play his position.
That would be – he went with Jaden Baugh.
He did. He went with Jaden Baugh. So that was one of the freshmen.
I was in between KD and Jaden. I gave you a JD there instead.
Yeah. We also just had JD on the show. Threw you for a loop there. He named Jaden Baugh, which at this point, any Florida fans that paid attention to that spring game and have paid attention to our coverage know Jaden Baugh is a freshman to watch in 2024. But Montrell Johnson also named another guy that I wasn't maybe expecting. I've heard good things about, but TJ Abrams. He said that TJ Abrams, like the second day of practice, just wowed him. And he was like, man, this guy's going to be good. Like, this guy's going to play right away. He's good enough to play right now. And between that comment from Montrell and then the comment from Billy and then also Graham Mertz, I thought it was interesting to hear about the wide receiver room, Nick, in Dallas, because so much has been made about Elijah Badger, right? And, granted, I think that he's one of 2 wide receiver transfers that they added, and Shamir DK, he didn't have the same type of reaction and same type of excitement, even though he really produced this spring. But Badger is a top 100 transfer. He was ranked really high. He was coveted. And when Florida landed him, ever since then, he's been one of the talking points at the receiver position along with Eugene Wilson. Like, people are very excited about Elijah Badger. And I thought that it was interesting to hear Billy's comment, Nick, about Badger on the set of SEC Media Days. His exact quote was, Badger just got there this summer, still learning the system, still getting adjusted to expectations and culture, but he's certainly talented 1,500 yards. That's what he said. And, I'm reading into those comments maybe a little bit, but I clearly there, just based on what he said, I still think that there's an adjustment there that's happening with Badger. Now, once they get to practice, once they get to game day, they know that he's going to be able to make an impact. But like, he is adjusting to just coming in the summer, learning the playbook, learning just what they do on a day-to-day, where he's supposed to be, what time he's supposed to show up for stuff. Like, these are all things that you got to adjust to as an incoming transfer. And Graham Mertz had a lot of great things to say about Elijah Badger, said that he understands how to win. He understands leverages. He understands the game. Spoke very highly of his football IQ, his route running. But, man, when you listen to Billy and Graham, Nick, they are very high on their wide receiver room. Like, they spoke highly of the young wide receivers, and almost to the point where it felt like Billy was like, you guys are counting these guys out. And like they are very excited about the TJ Abrams and the Aiden Mizels and the Tank Hawkins. One guy that really isn't getting talked about is Andy Jean, and he was maybe the most hype of that group, and he's been dealing with a hamstring injury and really didn't get to play in the spring. But all those guys that I just mentioned did, and really impressed Graham, really impressed Billy. Like, they feel good about their wide receiver room, Nick, and I can't say after the season ended and Ricky Pearsall was gone that I felt like they could feel that way at this point. But between adding Shamir DK, adding Badger, and then some of those guys stepping up in the spring, like, they feel like they're in a good spot. And Billy also, the first person, he got asked on set, Nick, about Elijah Badger and Shamir DK live on SEC Network. The first thing that Billy did in answering that question was talk about Khalil Jackson. And like, hey, don't forget about Khalil Jackson, this guy that started 9 games for us last year and made a bunch of crazy plays. So, I mean, there's just a lot of names there that you can go through. Marcus Burke. I mean, like, so they feel good about their wide receiver room. And this is not just Eugene Wilson, Elijah Badger, Shamir DK. Like, they're deep there, and they feel like they're going to have a healthy rotation.
Yeah, I think a lot of the narrative that Florida wasn't good in the wide receiver room was driven by how aggressively they went into the portal.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're not good.
It's just they were young.
I battled with fans with this all spring. It was like, Florida is actively trying to get at least one, probably 2 guys in the portal at receiver. What does that mean? Andy Jean stinks. Aiden Mizell stinks. I'm like, no, it just means that they're freshmen, redshirt freshmen, and they need someone that can come in and play right now. That's proven that that you're not worried about developing. That can come in and play right away and make an impact. It's not an indictment on anyone else. I like Andy Jean. I think my comparison of him, a mixture of Van Jefferson and Antonio Callaway, might have been ambitious and probably helped stoke some of that. Like, where is Andy Jean? But like, I think he's going to be a great player at Florida.
They do too.
And from what they do too, and from what I've heard, other schools, when the portal opened, thought Andy Jean would be a great player. And phone calls were made. So it's nothing against them. I do like where the wide receiver room is, but that's including the additions.
Yes.
So yeah, but like I did not like the wide receiver room in December.
Yeah.
but I like it a lot now.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Like I said, like to think about where they were and now where they've gotten to, and I mean, you can just go off the player ratings of EA Sports video game and see what Badger and DK are rated and be like, yeah, imagine that room without those two guys in it. But at the same time, like, you can't just play three guys at wide receiver. And that position is in a good spot. Really, Nick, I mean, when you think about it, every single room on offense is in great shape, really, save for the offensive guard room. Like every single position on offense is pretty stacked and like 3 deep solid. And guard is the only position where you're like, don't know. Like, who's going to start and we can project who's going to be the backups. You just don't know how they're going to perform because they're either young in there or they haven't played that spot or whatever. But like going back to, what we were talking about with JD, like there's really not a lot of question marks on the offensive side of the ball, man. You know what you're going to get. How they're going to replace Ricky Pearsall, we'll find out. But I think we know with who. Man, it just comes down to that defense. And there weren't a lot of things that were going to be said in Dallas that was going to sway the way anybody felt about this defense. Like it's, the one thing Napier did say, Nick, among all his interviews that he did, at one point he was kind of running through his team and his program and where they're at in year 3 that has him feeling confident going into this season. But he went through all of it, and then at the end of the day of his answer, he goes, but now we got to go prove it. And that's really where we're at. This is a prove it year for Billy. Like going back to the on schedule comment and how that's been taken, like to his words, those things that he thinks that they are on schedule with when it comes to infrastructure, staffing, personnel, roster building, upgrading the talent, getting this program humming the way that you want it. That stuff from where they were the first day that they showed up on the job to where they are now in 2024 going into year 3, like that schedule is not off in terms of all the internal building that's been taking place. But now you got to go out on the field and prove it that all those things are going to make a difference in the results. And hey, man, the one thing that we heard him also kind of emphasize was that they have not been able to close out games and that they have to do a better job of that. And some of the things that could maybe lead to that are the improvements that have happened in the strength and conditioning program and all the gains that have been made and how much better conditioned that we feel like, or we're hearing that this team is. That should show up with their stamina in the fourth quarter. Obviously, the changes that they made from a staffing standpoint, especially on the defensive side of the ball, the coaching there, that should show up in the fourth quarter. And then the talent and the experience. Napier said this is their most veteran team. Everybody that's on this roster signed up to play for the University of Florida. They want to be a part of this staff. And they're not a young team anymore. Well, that should show up in the fourth quarter and should allow you to win close games. So I guess all the ingredients are there, Nick. And to Napier's comment, they got to go out and prove now that they can do it.
Yeah, it's a roster full of his guys now as well. There's single-digit players left over that committed to another staff. The expectations have been set. The program is in place, and it is, in my opinion, and I think in your opinion, the best roster that Florida's had. Of course, you have the boogeyman of the schedule hiding under the bed, but it is, in my opinion, the most talented roster, the deepest roster that Billy Napier has had. That being said, Zach, I think there is optimism from the national media. When I was talking, like I said, to beat writers, I did not get the sense that there was a lot of confidence from the other beat writers. And I think that showed itself as we were talking to JD, the predicted order of finish from the SEC media contingent that was there came out, and Florida is predicted to finish 12th in the conference. I'm going to pull it up here, Zach. This is, if you are watching here on YouTube, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, top 4, Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Auburn, Kentucky, then Florida. Florida only ahead of South Carolina, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt. What are your initial thoughts on what our not coworkers, but what our peers picked out in Dallas, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, you look at that list, Nick, and I mean, it's hard to argue. You could maybe point to a couple of those. And, obviously for the folks that see Kentucky right there above Florida, like that's not good. Florida needs to beat Kentucky this year, point blank, period. And that right there could make a difference there in the order of finish with those two teams. Auburn, we'll see how they do in year 2 under Hugh Freeze, but that's a team that I think Florida could potentially finish higher than. And then Texas A&M, that's such a pivotal game, man. I've said it multiple times. I think that's a tricky matchup for Florida, and that's probably a game that they need to win. Otherwise, they will finish behind the Aggies in the final SEC standings.
Yeah, it's an interesting game, and talked with my buddy Ryan Bronger over at Texags. Talked with the Texags guys out in Dallas as well. There's a lot of I guess not hope, but optimism around Coach Elko and what he's able to do. They get Connor Wegman back, who, if they can keep him healthy, he's one of the, I think, in the top half of SEC quarterbacks as well. But when you look at it, you look at that schedule, and Florida gets 4 of the top 5.
4 of the top 5 teams.
Schedule, 6 of the top 7, and 8 of the top 10.
Brutal.
Don't get Arkansas, South Carolina, or Vanderbilt. But you did get Mississippi State.
And then when you look at that too, it's like Mississippi State. That just drives it home even more that like they got to win that game.
Yep.
Like they have to win their first SEC road game in Starkville. Just given their slate, given the expectations of the Bulldogs in year 1 with their coaching change, like it's never tough to go and play in that stadium, or it is always tough to go and play in that stadium in front of those cowbells, but like that is a game that Florida needs to win. And as it relates to the pecking order of the SEC, Kentucky is one that they got to get done. And then for them, again, to have the season that they want, the finish that they want, circling back to those comments from Roman Harper that we talked about, the Gators need to win games at the front of their schedule. And that means beating Texas A&M, beating Mississippi State, certainly taking care of business against Kentucky at home. And hey, man, you do that. Now maybe you finish 10th, or maybe even you creep up into a single-digit finish in the league if you can win some of those games. But right now, Nick, they aren't worried about this. They don't care about where they're being predicted. They are trying to get ready for week 1 against Miami. And as cliche as that sounds, as you know, Nick, that has to be their focus. Like they can't They can see this when it comes out and get motivated by it, but then back to work, back to fall training camp.
Add it. That's another coal to throw into the barbecue. Another coal to add to the fire. Another piece of firewood, Zach. Another chip on the shoulder. Everyone's got a chip.
Well, before we get out of here, that's right. Speaking of a chip, if you get a chipped tooth, make sure you go visit Prairie Dental Center. The doctor is a UF grad who's practiced in Gainesville for 3 decades and developed a deep understanding of how to diagnose and treat various dental problems, along with advanced skills and knowledge to provide better care for his patients. If you have dental concerns or just need a cleaning, Prairie Dental Center offers a wide range of options to meet your needs. Give their office a call at 352-373-3431. Tell them Gators Online sent you, and your new patient exam will be free. And as we do each and every show, if you're not subscribed to Gators Online, this is a special promo link for our listeners. You can go and type in that code UF1, get 2 months of access for just $1. And we've got a lot of stuff coming up with training camp approaching. We'll have some intel coming out at Gators Online. We'll have some juice on the message board and some little nuggets that we'll be tossing out from camp. You guys are going to want to follow along with all this. A big recruiting weekend coming up as well for Florida, and another big recruiting event as well at the end of July. So a bunch of stuff that you want to be tuned into. So make sure that you take advantage of that promo. Appreciate JD for joining us this week and giving us his thoughts on Florida coming off of SEC Media Days. Nick and I will be back next week as we kind of turn the page on this summer, man, and get ready for fall training camp. We'll start to preview this team, some of the biggest storylines heading into camp, what we'll be looking for. Nick and I is going to have an opportunity as well to kind of get a look at these players before camp comes. So a lot that we have to talk about and cover. So make sure that you guys stay locked with Gators Online and the Gators Online show. For Nick Del Torre, I'm Zach Appleverdi. We'll see you guys next week.